Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. My name is Victoria. We have some really interesting analysis to share with you today. We're really excited. If we could just jump straight in and go to the next slide, please. Great. So as I said, my name is Victoria. I work with the Mercy Corps AgriFin program. I'm based in Nairobi in Kenya. I've been with the team for 3.5 years, and I've been leading our climate work under the AgriFin portfolio. For those of you who don't know, the Mercy Corps AgriFin program works with organizations mainly in Africa, currently also in India, to design, test, and scale digitally enabled services for smallholder farmers. So we really focus on increasing smallholders' income, productivity, and resilience at scale. And currently we're working through a network of about 200 partners, both in private and public sector, to reach scale. I will ask Annie to please introduce himself, and hopefully Kristen is also on the line. Over to you, Annie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Ghosh. I'm an agriculture risk data scientist with the Alliance of Biodiversity International, CIAT. This is one of the CGIAR centers, if you are familiar with CGIAR. I'm based out of the Nairobi office, and my interest is broadly across, working on crop climate modeling, focusing on, better understanding and at a much more spatial, granular scale, the impact of climate change on crop and livestock systems, and also develop intervention strategies based on the location and the context. So, it ranges from developing advisory services to microfinance products. So over to you, Victoria, if Kristen is not there yet.
In the meantime, let me just give a couple of housekeeping points. The way we want to run the webinar today is to keep it as light as possible in terms of sharing this analysis with you. We would ask that please hold back from posting your questions into the chat until the designated time at the end, so that we can, address those actively as the presenters. So please post your questions in the chat box at the end of the presentation. So we'll have 15 minutes for audience Q&A at the end. I would also like to add that I think it's automatically muted. I think this was the problem that we found with Teams. So we will ask people to write their questions as opposed to unmuting. I think there's a large number of registrations for the webinar. And just to add that we'll post the link to the final report, which is available on our website. I'll ask somebody from the AgriFin team to post that into the chat box in a couple of minutes, so you can download the full report to read at your leisure. And also we'll be recording the webinar and sharing that afterwards. So no need to take notes unless you'd like to. Great, I think we can get started. Hopefully, Kristen.
Victoria, I'm here now.
Yay, okay. Do you want to introduce yourself, Kristen?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for that slight delay, and good afternoon from Nairobi. Thank you for joining the webinar. My name is Kristen Gervetz, and I'm the director of a small agriculture consulting company called AgThrive. We're dedicated to generating transformative impact for small-scale producers and micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises in emerging and developing economies. Much of our work is about building bridges between donors, investors, research, NGOs, government, actors in the private economy. And this includes producers and SME agribusinesses and startups who we think will be the drivers of growth in agriculture and livestock in the future. We have deep technical expertise in crop and livestock systems in Sub-Saharan Africa and also South Asia, climate change, resilience and adaptation, and also digital agriculture. I've been working with Mercy Corps AgriFin for the past 5 years on digital climate smart agriculture solutions, and really happy to be here with you today to share this most recent piece of research and analysis that we've done along with CIAT. So thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Kristen. Great, so on to the next slide, please. I'll just whiz through this. I think we're running a little bit behind, but I wanted to frame the webinar today based on the work that we're doing at AgriFin under digital climate smart agriculture. And before we dig into the real analysis, I think it would be interesting just to step back and understand what this is. So from AgriFin within the Mercy Corps wider world, we support, as I'd mentioned, digitally enabled products and services. And really what we're working on here is this providing a bridge between the digital world and the climate smart agriculture world. So in the middle, we see ourselves, our role as designing, testing and scaling out these solutions, building more evidence for what's working, what's not working under different contexts, bringing climate into the digital ecosystem and vice versa, and catalyzing high potential digital climate smart agriculture applications across Africa. So we understand digital as the common DCSA, as we'll probably call it going forward, as the intersection between digital technology and climate smart agriculture. On to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I think just as context, the AgriFin program, we set out to conduct this analysis working closely with Annie and Kristen and their teams to understand what really is the market opportunity for digital climate smart agriculture across 3 of our priority countries. So we've chosen Kenya, Ethiopia, and Nigeria for this analysis. And as you'll hear, Annie, a lot of the models exist for other markets as well, and we hope to be able to extend the analysis to other markets as well. So we set out to answer these 3 questions. Firstly, what's the total addressable market? Which crops and livestock are most vulnerable to climate impacts in these individual countries? And what are which crops and livestock, again, are projected to increase or decrease in suitability under climate change? And then on step 3, if you look to the left of the slide, which of these solutions are most relevant for smallholder farmers who are involved in different crops and livestock? And so I think the main takeaway here is that we understand that this analysis is a starting point. You'll see how we've conducted it. And I think it provides a nice segue from, I think, a lot of us working in the agtech fintech sector see a lot of analysis about climate impacts in Africa, but not often do we see the risks and hazards modeled at the country level. And then clearly the next step would be to work on a case-by-case basis. If you're a farmer-facing organization or a business working in one of those value chains which is heavily affected, then you dig deeper to understand where the digital opportunities are to really make a difference for the smallholders. Before we move on to the meat of the webinar, we wanted to attempt to run a quick poll. So let's see if that can work. If you head to the chat function in your Teams, you should be able to see a poll, which we wanted to understand. Is it going to work? Let's see. We wanted to understand where our audience sits in terms of their understanding of which hazards are most affecting smallholders in each country. I'm not sure if we're able to do the first poll for Kenya. If not, just unmute and let me know, Cynthia. Okay, here we go. Right, so the first question you'll see in the chat box, which climate hazard affects the most smallholders in Kenya? Do you think it's flood, climate variability, drought, or thermal stress? So if you select your option and submit the vote, we should start to see what the audience thinks here. Yeah, it looks like a lot of people maybe around Kenya experiencing the drought that we have currently feel that that's probably the highest one, followed closely by climate variability. Great. As those responses keep coming in, yeah, flood is clearly not on people's radar. Yeah, climate variability for Kenya is the correct answer, affecting 10 million smallholder farmers, as you will see in our analysis shortly. So if we look at the same question for Nigeria, if you could post that poll in for Nigeria, we can also have a look. Great. So which hazard affects the most smallholder farmers in Nigeria? Is it climate variability, flood, thermal stress, or dry conditions? Cast your votes. A lot of votes for climate variability here. Some more people indicating flood. 72 responses. Great. Yeah, so for Nigeria, as you'll see, this is really interesting. Thermal stress is really the big issue in Nigeria, affecting 58 million smallholder farmers in Nigeria. And I think we can leave it there for now. I don't want to take too much time, but for Ethiopia, Annie and Kristen will take us through what the picture looks like. Thank you for your active participation in the poll. I think with that, let me just check. I think, let's get started. So let me hand over to Kristen to start walking us through the analysis. Thanks, Kristen.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. So let's just kick off and start with the bottom line and big takeaway message, which is that the potential for digital climate smart agriculture, so as Victoria said, we'll refer to that as DCSA, is huge, and it cuts across countries, different climate change impacts that farmers are experiencing now and will face in the future, and also different production systems and different levels of mobile penetration. Yes, there are differences across these factors, which we will discuss later, but bottom line is that the potential is big everywhere. So there are 34 million people living in smallholder farmer households who could benefit from DCSA in these 3 countries alone. Extrapolate that to all of sub-Saharan Africa, and you get a massive number. So I'm sure you're wondering about the methodology of calculating the total addressable market, so the TAM for DCSA. So we've defined the total addressable market for DCSA targeted to smallholder farmers as the number of smallholder farmers who have been and are likely to continue to be impacted by climate hazards, and who also have access to a mobile phone and the network to use it. So these farmers have experienced, for example, drought or floods, or simply a repeated pattern of unreliable rains. They will continue to experience this in the future. They are likely to continue to experience this in the future, and they have access to a digital channel. The assumption goes that they will be motivated to, because of these factors, they'll be motivated to, for example, receive weather information and target advisory, or purchase crop insurance, or find better markets for their crops. And they are at least have the potential of accessing this information or these services via a digital channel. Here, as I said, we've limited it to mobile. That's how we calculated it. This gives us a high-level measure and understanding of how many farmers need and could possibly use digital climate smart agriculture services. This is a starting point for understanding the possible market for DCSA in these countries. And we know that there are many factors driving whether an individual will use DCSA, including their level of digital literacy, and also that not every farmer has the same experience of climate hazards. So this doesn't tell us about adoption, active use, or impact, only potential. While the level of climate risk certainly can affect the market for DCSA, and Ani will go into that, and I see the slide is already up, the bigger driver is mobile penetration. As mobile penetration continues to expand, especially in countries such as Ethiopia, where it is still quite low, the market for DCSA expands with it. And right now, as you can see from this analysis, there are 52 million people in these 3 countries who are vulnerable to climate change hazards and could potentially benefit from DCSA because of this, but they are currently limited in doing so by their lack of digital connectivity. So now, given that sort of setup of, look, we're looking at a huge market, based on the calculations that we made, let's turn it over to Ani to dig into what these big climate hazards are in the 3 countries. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Victoria. So I'd like to start with giving you an overview of the impact of climate change on smallholder farmers in the 3 countries we focused on, Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria. To begin with, let me explain a little bit more about, how we set up the foundation, right? And there was a question I could see in the chat about, asking about what thermal stress is. So we'll try to cover it briefly. As briefly we can. So basically, we looked into 3 components following the IPCC framework: hazard, exposure, and vulnerability in this context. So hazard refers to the occurrence of different climate risks, including thermal stress, drought, flood, rainfall variability, and a combination of them. Now, why is hazard important, right? Because we talk about different climate change scenarios, right? We say, okay, this year has been very dry. This year has been, very hot. But there is actually a certain threshold that needs to be reached and crossed. Then when we can say a particular climate pattern is hazard, right? This threshold is also location and value chain specific. Some value chain could be hazardous in countries like Kenya, whereas in Nigeria that might not be hazardous, right? Given the local context and the the way the climatology works. And then in terms of the exposure, exposure is the population is the extent to which the rural population living in different regions is exposed to different climate hazards. In this analysis, we concentrate only on the direct effects, right? So if we have a rural population and that intersects with some hazard, we only looked into that particular population. We didn't look into any indirect ones that might be a result of any regional or global dynamics. Definitely, the local hazard conditions are driven by the regional and the global, but there can be some effect that is happening, let's say, in the classical example is deforestation in some areas, and that might drive the hazard in different locations. So we didn't look into this kind of decoupling. And lastly, the vulnerability refers to susceptibility or of exposed elements such as human beings, their livelihoods and assets to suffer adverse effects when impacted by hazard events. In this case, we looked into a different aspect, which is the opposite of the vulnerability. We looked into the resilience or adaptive capacity based on the digital solutions that Christine just mentioned. Now, if we look at the specific impacts on smallholder farmers in these three countries, we'll see that the ranking of the number of smallholder population affected by these different hazards are different in different countries, and this is expected because Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, they have different type of production system. They experience different climatology, right? So when you look at it, we see that Ethiopia and Kenya have a higher number of farmers at risk for climate variability, drought, while Nigeria has a higher number of farmers at risk of dry conditions and thermal stress. You can see that flood is a concern in all three countries, but it's a limited number, right? It's small. It's much smaller compared to all the other hazards. Now, it is essential to understand that specific risks faced by farmers in each country and the interventions that will be tailored to support their resilience and reduce their vulnerability will be very much location specific. So, a solution that will work in Kenya might look very different in Ethiopia, and that might be also indifferent in Nigeria. Now, we are presenting the work for three countries, but there will be some resources provided if you are interested in looking into all the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. And there you will see that how this different climate hazards varies with different country, different production system, and for different value chain. Next slide, please. Yeah, so for, no, the previous one, please. Yes. So for here, in this slide, we'll quickly go through what does it mean to be this different. What does this different hazard mean? So we basically calculated a number of hazard categories, and we combined them into four of these main dimensions, which includes highly variable and extreme variable annual mean rainfall. So that usually refers to unexpected behavior of when the rain will start, how much rain we'll receive during the monsoon season. Then there is thermal stress. So thermal stress is a combination of humidity and the extreme temperature that is received. And then there is risk of flooding and risk of drought. The most critical piece of our approach is the co-occurrence of hazards in the given grid cell, right? In a location, it can happen that any combination of the above dimensions. So one example could be for, in the monsoon season, we can see a lot of, variability in the rainfall, and in the shorter rain season for Kenya, let's say in the dry rain season, we can see a lot of, let's say, number of days without any rainfall, right? So depending on the seasonality, we can experience, these different hazards occurring in the same location, but at different time period. To simplify the understanding of the resulting combination of hazards, we created a more descriptive set of classes. For example, when climate variability and drought co-occur, we termed them as climate variability leading to drought and so on. This approach allows us to better understand the combined effect of climate hazard on specific locations. It is important to mention that we did not consider the frequency of hazards. We basically, one of the limitations of this approach is that an area that experiences a rare once in 100-year flood event, let's say, would be grouped into the same category as areas that experience frequent floods. Next slide, please. So before I related to that, before I jump into this map, you see that all of Kenya is shown under some sort of hazards, right? What does it mean? That means that all the grid cells or all the locations in the Kenya at some point of time will experience some sort of hazard, but they might not be as frequent as the other places, right? Now, what are the most important climate hazards in the country? To better understand this, we looked into climate hazards on different farming or production systems. We looked into the 4 major farming systems in Kenya. The table on the right summarizes the number of smallholder farmers at risk, the main climate hazard, and their impact on the farmers of each system. So we can see that the highland perennial system, which is usually referred to the moist highland areas with good market access above 400-meter mean sea level with diverse productions. You can find a lot of crops growing there. You can also find livestock there, has around 6 million smallholder farmers at risk due to climate variability leading to drought. And this area in Kenya is basically around the central Kenya. This can make it difficult to manage the growing season and can result in crop failure and livestock mortality. The pastoral system, primarily the arid areas, you can see the large part, which is represented in yellow, has the same number of smallholder farmers at risk due to dry conditions with thermal stress and climate variability leading to drought, resulting in decreased availability of resources and low output for the farmer. Now, although it is a large area, it is covering many of the areas in Kenya, much of the areas in Kenya that is sparsely populated. Therefore, even covering larger area because of the low density of the population, it is affecting, it is affecting as many as population as the highland perennial system. The maize mix system, which is the subhumid and humid areas dominated by maize and legume, has around 3 million smallholder farmers at risk due to various climate hazards, while the agropastoral systems, which is the intense system, the shared system between the agriculture and pastoral, which is found generally in the semi-arid areas, has 2 million smallholder farmers at risk due to climate variability leading to drought and high variability. These hazards make it difficult to manage the growing season and can result in decreased yields and a need for, let's say, shifting to a different crop or shifting to some of the climate-proof varieties like, heat-tolerant maize and, other improved seed. So given this background, I'm now handing over to Christine to describe what it means for the total addressable market for Kenya for a particular value chain. Over to you, Christine.
Thanks, Ani. So next slide, please. Wait. Okay, no, we didn't go to this slide. Okay, now, but Ani, you already spoke about this, so let's go to the next one. There we go. Okay, so let's dig into the total addressable market for Kenya. So there are 16 million individuals in smallholder farmer households who are facing climate hazards. 41% of these individuals have access to some kind of mobile connection. Thus, with our very simple calculation, that means 6.6 million smallholder farmers in Kenya need and have the channel to utilize DCSA. So in this case, Kenya has strong mobile coverage compared to other sub-Saharan African countries, but still you can see how mobile connectivity will still limit the market for DCSA a bit. And as mentioned previously, and I want to emphasize again, we understand that this figure does not represent expected adoption or active use, just the potential. So then combining this with what Ani was just speaking about in terms of climate hazards for different production systems, let's talk just for a second about what this might look like for farmers. And how that could translate to some DCSA solutions. So, for example, let's take a farmer in the highland perennial system, growing a mix of crops, including bananas and having some dairy cattle with good access to markets and services. So production over the last couple of years has been low due to low rainfall. This farmer, she doesn't know anymore when the rains will start or whether it will be enough to produce a good crop. Sometimes it is good and sometimes not, but she knows it's worse in other parts of the country and that her prices have been high due to low production elsewhere. She gets some weather info from the radio, but doesn't find it to be particularly accurate. Right now, it is hard to feed the dairy cows enough to get a good supply of milk. She heard from a neighbor about producing silage, but that it could be a good option for her, but she doesn't know anything about silage production. So this farmer has an old smartphone and good network connectivity. So what DCSA services do you think could meet this farmer's needs? And that's just food for thought for us to start thinking about as we continue with this. Another example, tying together the production system information. Let's look at pastoralists managing a herd of cattle and goats in the ASOLs. So drought is persistent. The herd has not been able to recover good health in the brief respite during some times of rain and green grass. A huge number of animals have died. Finding enough food and water for the remaining animals is tough. It is hard to find a good price when selling due to skinny animals and depressed market prices. But the word from the market is that there are buyers from the Middle East who want goats, and he would like to capture this market. This pastoralist has a cheap smartphone that goes in and out of network coverage. What DCSA service could meet this pastoralist needs? So you can see those are two very, very different examples. And one of the main points that Ani and others, scientists who work in this field of CSA, will emphasize is that there's great diversity in production systems and climate impacts and smallholder farmer needs, even within countries and production systems, and that you're never going to have a one-size-fits-all CSA solution. So that's possibly a production solution and technology on the farm. And that goes also for DCSA. Any DCSA solution needs to account for local context and priorities. Next slide, please. So to dig a little deeper, let's take a specific crop. And when you see this full set of information, you'll see that we did a deep dive on 2 crops for each country. So for that looked at the importance of crop and livestock times the climate risk and opportunities plus data availability. That's how we prioritize them to select the crops. For Kenya, beans and maize were selected, and today we'll talk a little bit about beans. It's a very dense slide, but let's focus on a few points. So first, I think many of us know that beans are a hugely important crop for Kenya with one of the highest areas of production. It's a CSA country priority, meaning it has locally been identified as being a priority value chain for climate smart approach. It has high climate risk, and I'll talk about that in a minute, due to shifts in suitability of land. It's important for national nutrition, and it's an important crop for women. So we prioritized it. So you can see on the left of the slide from your screen that climate variability leading to drought, as we already know, is the biggest climate hazard in Kenya right now, affecting the most farmers. It's also the biggest climate hazard for beans, and it can lead to crop losses in the range of almost $300 million. We see this risk now in Kenya. We don't need to go into that, but we're in a period of prolonged drought, waiting for the long rains to start. But we don't know when it will start or whether it will be reliable and produce a good yield. But we might continue to have the same practices in absence of better information on what could work given these shifting conditions. Now, a whole other layer of this analysis is looking at suitability in the future. So with climate change, how will cropland change in suitability for bean production? And if you have questions about the methodology for calculating and looking at suitability, Ani, I think, can answer those later in this discussion. We won't go deeply into it here. Bottom line is models show that more than half of the area where beans are currently produced will be less suitable for production in Kenya. It doesn't mean that beans can't be grown there, but it will be increasingly challenging, will require better information, possibly different varietals and inputs. At the same time, there's other areas where suitability for bean production is increasing. So there's also an opportunity, but it's outside of those existing crop areas. And that comes with specific needs and considerations. It's not easy to shift to new crops for farmers. But it's definitely worth addressing because bean producers in Kenya alone are a huge potential market for DCSA at 675,000 smallholder farmer households. And you can begin to think about and problem solve about what solutions might work for them. Now I'm heading back to Ani and on to Ethiopia. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Christine. So as like the Kenya analysis, we also did the same analysis for Ethiopia, and in Ethiopia we found that there is also a diverse number of climate hazard that the production systems are facing. In the maize system, we see that 3.4 million smallholders are at risk of climate variability leading to drought and thermal stress, which can again reduce the productivity of crop and also increase the mortality in the livestock. In the highland perennial system, almost 2.9 million farmers are at risk of thermal stress. And then, adoption measures like something like shade and irrigation that can improve the conditions or mitigate the effect of some of this risk. In the pastoral system, 2.9 million farmers are at risk of dry conditions with thermal stress, leading to decreased availability of the feed and the water for livestock, and it can also lead to high mortality of animals. And it is kind of the same situation what we are experiencing in the northern Kenya, and it's basically the northern Kenya part and the southern Ethiopian part of the pastoral system. They follow the similar climatic behavior. So it's across the border, although there is this geographical border, but the effect of the climate variability in both countries are the same. In the agropastoral system, 2.2 million farmers are at risk due to climate variability leading to drought, dry conditions with thermal stress, and in this case, shifting crop and variety suitability and decreasing. That might lead to shifting crop and variety suitability, and also yield decrease. So one of the things about Ethiopia that we noticed is that the highland system, if you look at it, none of the hazards at this point, it crosses the threshold. So it's not that it is not experiencing any sort of extreme behavior, extreme climate patterns, but what is happening is because of the topography of the region, most likely, we are not seeing any of these trends to be becoming hazardous. So that's a good sign. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So now the previous one. Yeah, so just to wrap up for the Ethiopian context. So basically, in the previous one, we looked into the hazards and the effect by different production system. Now, what does it mean at the country level? So as a total, there are 20 million rural Ethiopian, which is more than the 20% of the rural population are at risk of climate hazard. This includes 12 million smallholder farmers who are facing multiple hazards. This is also very important. And this ranges from climate variability leading to drought, which is the most widespread. The farmers may also experience variable onset and poor distribution of the rain throughout the season, making it difficult to plan and execute successful growing season, especially the rainfall system. Now, given these concerns, we would like to explore, what does it mean for the digital CSA solutions? Over to you, Christian.
Thanks, Ani. So here's the TAM for Ethiopia. So 12 million, just to summarize, 12 million individuals and smallholder farmer households are facing climate hazards. Only 19% of these individuals have access to a mobile connection, meaning only 2.3 million smallholder farmers in Ethiopia could possibly utilize DCSA. So you can see it's a much smaller number than in Kenya and just a smaller percentage overall. In the case of Ethiopia, I think, as many of us know, the market for DCSA or any kind of digital service is hugely constrained by mobile penetration. Is likely to change. I think people with experience in Ethiopia will know that this is a changing, rapidly changing market. Safaricom has gone in, there's services being ramped up, and I think we can, as we watch this market, we can expect it to grow in the next few years. And then building on the previous data Ani was talking you through. So for Ethiopia, we know that mobile penetration is lower, but you still have climate hazards that need to be addressed, and there are some DCSA solutions that could be leveraged. So let's say take a farmer in the maize mix system. So essentially sort of the food basket, producing all the food that people eat. Mix of crop and livestock, medium access to services and markets, land sizes are shrinking, rain is less reliable with increasing drought. There at times can still be enough rain to produce different crops. Increasingly difficult to make a living off of production of some of the staple crops, and the farmer could benefit from diversifying to higher value crops such as horticulture or livestock. But markets are a challenge. Only medium connectivity to markets. No access to credit for this farmer. She's been borrowing a family member's phone, but recently decided to invest in a feature phone and obtain a mobile connection. So let's think about this farmer and what DCSA services could benefit in that type of scenario, different from the type of scenario that we saw in Kenya, although there are similarities as well. So it's just a brief snapshot of what's a complicated livelihood. But one can start imagining a set of bundled digital services plus the digital literacy support that would be needed in Ethiopia as mobile penetration improves that could support this farmer. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for Ethiopia, sweet potato and sorghum were selected for a deeper look. Today, we'll dig a little bit into sorghum in the Ethiopian context. So sorghum is an important crop in Ethiopia. It's with one of the highest areas of production, also value of production. It's a CSA country priority. So the local actors have prioritized it for climate smart agriculture. It's a food security crop, especially important for farmers in the dry lowlands. So some of the agropastoral production system. There's a high climate risk for sorghum with a strong decreased suitability of current cropland, but also some climate opportunity with an increase in suitability in other areas. So if you look again at the left, so thermal stress and climate variability leading to drought combined are the biggest climate hazards, leading to crop losses in the range of almost 270 million. Under these climate hazards, heat and water stress increases. Rains are unreliable in some areas. One of the drivers of crop loss for sorghum is when dry conditions hit at the grain filling stage. So it's also, that's just to say, it's not just, dry conditions at any time, at particular times. It's really going to cause an impact in the crop. So it's weather conditions times the timing. For climate risk versus opportunity, you look in the middle of the slide, models show that this is a bit of a shocking number, that over 80% of current sorghum cropland will become less climatically suitable for sorghum production under climate change. That's a massive number. Given the importance of sorghum that we just talked about, this needs to be addressed clearly. Farmers will require better information, possibly different varietals and inputs. Some farmers may need to shift out of sorghum production altogether. So what options do they have, and how can they be supported with the info and inputs that they need? How can we leverage digital solutions for that? At the same time, you can also see that a huge area of land will become more suitable for sorghum. So production could possibly shift into some of those areas. Most likely it will shift into the productive highland area, but this could displace other crops. So current and future sorghum producers in Ethiopia are a huge potential market for DCSA. We can begin to think about and problem solve what DCSA solutions these sorghum farmers might need. Now back to Ani to get us started on Nigeria. Next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. So a similar analysis we conducted for Nigeria, and the numbers are quite large compared to Ethiopia and Kenya, because Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, and also the smallholder numbers are significantly higher than other countries. In Nigeria, you can see in the map that most of the area is dominated by one particular risk. So it's basically the thermal stress is prevalent everywhere. So about 19 million farmers in the agropastoral system are affected by thermal stress, dry conditions, and occasional flood. And that is leading to reduced productivity of crops and livestock. Now, in general, what farmers need to do is to, let's say, maybe they can use different, thermal tolerant varieties, or also, practice agronomic or adopt agronomic practices, and also, use strategies like building more shelters for the livestock to protect them from the thermal stress. In the cereal root crop system, this is a system we have not seen in the Ethiopia or Kenya. This is specific to Nigeria and some of the other countries. About 17 million farmers are affected by thermal stress, again leading to reduced productivity of the crop and livestock. And also it can lead to heat stress for human. What does it mean for the different adaptive strategy? Like, there might be a need to shift the planting date depending on when the rain is coming. And then also the variety selection is becoming more and more important. In the root and tuber crop system, we see that around 9 million farmers are affected by thermal stress. In this case, the adaptive practices such that no-till or variety selection can be important for making the system more resilient. If you are familiar with the Nigeria system, Nigeria has a huge from south to north, once you travel, in diversity in the climatology, right? And now, if you move to the south in the humid lowland tree crop system, around 8 million farmers also there are affected mostly by thermal stress. And then there are some flood impact we could see, but it's not that important. And then there are less than 1 million farmers in pastoral systems that they are affected, experiencing some sort of heat stress, and that might be related to some reduced water availability. And then the remaining is the highland mix system, but the number of farmers experiencing is much lower than agropastoral and the cereal root crop system. Next slide, please. Now, because of the definition, how we are approaching the risk, like as I mentioned at the beginning slide, that if any of the grid cell is experiencing any risk, they are listed in this analysis. So because of that, all rural residents in Nigeria, what we have found is under some sort of risk. Over 8 million of them are risk of facing 2 or more climate hazards. That makes it more difficult even for the adaptation strategies from the digital CSA perspective, because in one season you can have one hazard and compared to the next season. And then thermal stress affects all farmers, livestock, and farm workers. And the livestock production system could suffer from reduced productivity, fertility. We can also see increased disease susceptibility and sometimes increased mortality. Now, one point to note here is different livestock species will have different level of exposure. So if you are raising, let's say, cattle or dairy cow, that would get affected different as from goats, right? So with this background, I'm handing over to Kristen to explain different DCSA solutions.
Okay, next slide. We don't get so much into the solutions in this presentation, but looking at the potential here. So this is the total addressable market for Nigeria. As you can imagine, and as Ani already mentioned, the scale is on another level than the first 2 countries we discussed. So 58 million individuals in smallholder farmer households are facing climate hazards. 44% of these, it's pretty high rural mobile penetration of these individuals have access to mobile connections. So 26 million smallholder farmers in Nigeria need and could utilize DCSA. So similar to Kenya, Nigeria has a high mobile penetration for the continent, unless the potential is just absolutely massive. So building on the production system data, just to give an example, to think about what the opportunities might be. In Nigeria, this could look like a farmer in the cereal root crop system, facing heat and water stress for their crops and livestock, and also themselves. As Ani mentioned, when you're dealing with thermal stress as being a high risk as a climate hazard, that applies for humans as well. The need for shade, the need for water, the need for protecting yourself, when you're working on the farm. Temperatures are high, water is growing scarce. Farmers engaged in mixed farming with medium-high access to services. This is in the cereal root crop system in Nigeria. They're producing staples such as maize and sorghum alongside roots and tubers, so cassava, yams. And then they also have other livelihood sources. They're bringing in legumes, cattle, off-farm work. They need water conservation and irrigation technologies, tolerant varietals, shade, access to markets. This farmer owns a feature phone and has excellent network coverage. Let's think about what DCSA solutions might be useful to her. Next slide, please. So let's dig deeper into yams, a part of the cereal root crop system. So for Nigeria, yams and cowpeas were selected for the deeper dive. And for now, we'll talk about yams since we were using the cereal root crop example. So they're a hugely important crop for Nigeria with the highest area and values of production in the country. It's food security and a cash crop. It has low climate risk, which we'll talk about in a minute. So that makes it a prime candidate. So the interesting thing, so thermal stress, just like for the rest of the country, thermal stress is the primary climate hazard impacting yams, and it puts at risk, this is a shocking figure, 12 billion in production. $12 billion, that is, in production. So that's just an absolutely massive number. And under thermal stress, as we've already said, heat and water stress increase, disease and pests shift and increase. And we clearly need solutions for producing yams under thermal stress, given these figures. On the positive side for yams, models show that there is actually a minimal reduction expected in the land area climatically suitable for yam production under climate change. You can see that in the middle of the slide here, and actually potentially a massive opportunity to increase yam production in other areas of the country, pending, technology, other suitability indicators, the ability for farmers in these areas to actually access markets. And then not only all of these things, but a lot of people grow yams. So more than 5.4 million smallholder farmers could capitalize on this stability and growth potential under climate change. They may need new markets. They need continued production support as they deal with thermal stress. And we can begin to think about, under this scenario, how we could leverage DCSA solutions for Nigerian yam farmers. And on that somewhat positive note, we'll go back to Victoria for next steps and a wrap up.
Thank you so much, Annie and Kristen. This has been really fascinating to hear you walk through the analysis as well. So thank you so much for that. There are some questions if you have a minute to take a look at the questions, and then we can hopefully address some of those during the next 10 minutes. So I guess, on what next for the AgriFin program, and where this analysis fits into the way that we are working with partners on the ground. And when I say partners, this, as I mentioned before, is public and private sector partners that themselves work on digital solutions and products aimed at smallholder farmers across Africa. So I think, for us, when we talk to partners, we understand that, climate change is rather an abstract term for many players working in agriculture still. And, there are some who've had the privilege to go deep and learn a lot about the specific hazards and impacts that would, benefit these partners understanding more in order to kind of pivot their businesses or their products to support farmers to build that resilience, adapt to these real climate impacts. So I think this is really exciting for us to have some of that wealth of data that sits within, within CIAT, who's a great partner for us, and other CGIAR centers, bringing that data and applying it in a way that can be really useful for partners who are actively working on product design, testing new ideas, and trying to scale digital solutions for smallholders. So just in a nutshell, I think we're really excited. We hope to build on this analysis, using it on a case-by-case basis with partners to go to that next level of kind of understanding the market as a whole, understanding the landscape, and then digging in to get obviously more kind of climate expertise and scientific evidence, but really also start to support partners even more around building the tools and solutions that can address this huge market opportunity. So we've already done a huge amount of work at AgriFin. Kristen mentioned some great examples of what digital climate smart agriculture looks like in action. We've already done a number of engagements over the last many years, actually, that are really supporting farmers, whether that's weather information, early warning systems, for example. And recently we've done some brilliant engagements with some of, I think, the pioneers really in DCSA. So organizations like Farm to Feed, who are building a digital platform for imperfect and surplus food, Apollo Agriculture and Crop Nuts working together on soil mapping and climate smart inputs. MEDI, of course, doing a lot of work on training and awareness for farmers using digital channels. 1 Acre Fund, Ignitia, and others working on optimized agronomy, Regen Organics on agent training and farmer incentives to start using and repeat usage for organic or climate smart fertilizer. So lots of really exciting work. And I think just to say, as we close on this webinar, is that we'll continue to build out more tools. I think we won't go into that now. I think we'll leave that for a future. webinar, but just to say there is a DCSA playbook which has recently been updated, available on our website. The full report, which you've seen presented today on the market opportunity and total addressable market, that's also available on our website. We'll continue to build up more case studies and build the evidence for what's working, what's not working in this space. We also have an exciting collaboration with CIAT, which they'll be launching soon, which is a tool to really document examples of gender and climate, the intersection of case studies that's supporting both opportunity areas at once. And finally, we're working again with CIAT under the AgriFin program to take the work that they're doing to measure digital climate smart agriculture, or to understand the impact and measuring impact, for climate smart investments. So bringing the tools, understanding the methodology, the indicators and metrics to track this and quantify it. So yeah, so that's all coming soon. I will finish there because I know we're running very short on time, but if we have any questions whilst I've been speaking that any of the presenters would like to address. And Collins, thank you for posting the link to the report there. Are there any questions that the speakers would like to tackle now? We can move to the Q&A slide, or the thank you slide. Thanks.
Thank you, Victoria. Just a quick note from my end. There are a lot of interesting questions and observations shared. And I think in the interest of the time, what we can do is basically, collect all the questions and possibly, create a response later and get back to, the audience at a later time.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So we'll be sure to make sure that we are. Yeah, some very technical questions here I can see. So yeah, I think that's a good idea, Annie, to understand a little bit. Take some more time to look at these questions in detail. I know there was a question around understanding mobile access. Where is it here? Correlation between access to mobile phones and availability of mobile network coverage. So I think I would say, obviously, we've leveraged a lot of the GSMA data here. I think there may be some GSMA folks on the webinar today, but really in terms of mobile network coverage maps, the GSMA has fantastic data on that side. We'll definitely be sharing the recording, just looking through any more of these questions that we could take in the last couple of minutes. So there's a question here around, giving more examples of DCSA informing farmers is one, but enabling farmers to act on climate risks is a difficult and necessary next step. So how can access to drought-tolerant seed and shade trees be enhanced digitally? So that's a really good question, and that's really one of the big challenges, I think, in driving customers, in this case farmers, along that customer journey of awareness, understanding, trial, use and repeat use. So I think digital tools really can be so fantastic as a way to reach a lot of farmers affordably and quickly in terms of the awareness piece. So both through media channels like TV or radio, directly through SMS campaigns, even Facebook ads and campaigns, just to drive that awareness about the benefits of using, for example, drought-tolerant seed. And then it's around trying to incentivize the input providers or some of the bundle service providers who do training bundled with input finance, let's say, to start looking at other types of inputs. So, substituting the traditional inputs that could be part of that bundle with more climate smart inputs as an example. So linking the finance directly in through those digital bundles. Yeah, and then the access to market, I think this is a big area, these digital platforms that can really build the demand and awareness at the customer level of what climate smart agriculture means from a health point of view, nutrition, etc. So yeah, I hope that answers your question a little bit. Great. I think at this stage, unless any of the presenters would like to take any of the final questions, I think we'll probably bring this to a close, but that leaves me just to say a very big thank you to Annie and Kristen for doing a fantastic job here, taking us through some very complex analysis, but making it very interesting. And thank you especially to the audience for taking the time. And we look forward to following up with you all on the questions, and apologies for not having a bit more time for that. There was a lot to fit in. But yeah, a big thank you to everybody, and look forward to taking this all forward.